Yeah, hi everyone, and thank you very much for joining my talk. I'm really grateful to be here today and be part of this event, and I'm looking forward to sharing knowledge, thoughts, and ideas during this coming week. My name is Julia Schmack, and thank you very much, Stephanie, for the lovely introduction. I'm a postdoctoral researcher here at the Chair for Urban Productive Ecosystems at TUM, and I'll be talking today to you about ecosystem services and agroecosystems in urban agriculture. And when I listen to talks, I usually like to find out about the background and the motivation of people and why they are doing what they're doing. So I decided to introduce myself a bit before we start. This is where I grew up, in a small village in Western Germany, and the place certainly had more cows than inhabitants. You can see there's a lot of forest around the fields. Rhineland-Palatinate is a country, is a state with the highest surface area of forest compared to the landscape. And you can see in this photo, there are a lot of hedges in between and forest and small scale agriculture. So this picture changed quite quickly while I was growing up, and these diverse fields developed into monocultures, the hedges disappeared and the forests shrank. And with this, I noticed that the insects, the amphibians, and all the good stuff became less and less as well. So observing this change motivated me to study environmental impact assessment for my bachelor's, and then I went to Frankfurt to study ecology and evolution for my master's. And after completing my thesis in the tropics, I then worked for the Organic Agriculture Research Institute in Frankfurt, FiBL, you might have heard of it. It's in Frankfurt in Germany and Switzerland and Austria. And it's a really nice combination of practical science, or like science that it's applicable in practice for farmers. And here I also did the traineeship for organic farming and organic value chain management. But since I always had a weak spot for shiny insects, I then wanted to go back to academia and to university. So I went to New Zealand to do my PhD on social wasps. And I'm back home since last year and joined Professor Monika Egerer's chair here at the TUM, where I'm standing right now. Okay, so much for my background and why I became an ecologist. And now I'd like to put the focus on ecosystem services in agriculture. So this concept of ecosystem services is trending a little bit at the moment, but it's not a new idea. It goes back to the 1970s, where natural and social scientists started creating this utilitarian framing of those ecosystem functions which are deemed beneficial to society. And often that's a critique on ecosystem services, that it's used to monetize nature, but that's not the intent of this concept. So the concept was developed not out of economic interest, but to increase the public interest in biodiversity conservation. So throughout the 1980s, the concept was part of the sustainability debate and became a bridging concept with natural and social science notions. And the people that you see in the top photo here, Anne and Paul Ehrlich, they coined this term ecosystem services in 1981. Throughout the 90s, this concept evolved throughout various publications. And one of the main key figures here is Gretchen C. Daly. She's a professor at Stanford University for environmental sciences. And she really put the field forward in terms of valuing nature in policy, and finance, management, and practice around the world. And there are numerous definitions, but maybe we use as a starting point or as a departure point here this definition by the Economics of Ecosystems and Biodiversity Foundation, which states that ecosystem services are the direct and indirect contributions of ecosystems to human well-being. Or to put it in simple words, they are the benefits that people obtain from ecosystems, either directly or indirectly. And I have three classic examples for you. The first one is photosynthesis by plants. Then we have pollination provided by insects, and soil formation provided by different soil organisms. And in total, we have classified 19 ecosystem services. These 19, sorry, that's an overwhelming figure, but I'll run you through this. These 19 ecosystem services can be grouped into 4 different categories. So the dark green here are the provisioning ecosystem services. food, raw materials, medicinal resources, and fresh water. So we could call them the products of an ecosystem. And then we have the regulating ecosystem services, such as air quality regulation, climate regulation, water regulation, erosion regulation, water purification and waste treatment, disease and pest management, pollination and moderation of extreme events. And then the supporting ecosystem services, which are the basis of all the others, those are nutrient cycling, photosynthesis, and soil formation. What I mean with the basis, you see that without photosynthesis, there are no raw materials. Without soil formation, there's no erosion regulation. And the last ones, very important ones, cultural ecosystem services. So direct benefits for human well-being, mental and physical health, recreation and ecotourism, aesthetic values, and spiritual and religious values. And I think looking at this figure, it becomes pretty obvious that without these services, we as a species wouldn't be able to survive probably a day, nor would most other species. So it is paramount for human well-being to maintain the provision of services. And the interest in this relationship between human well-being and ecosystem services has grown exponentially over the past 20 years. It picked up with the publication of the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment Report in 2005. Then you can see this exponential growth here in publications on that topic. So we can keep in mind there's a lot of research, there's a lot of debating and policy making has been invested into this topic over the past decades, but we're still, or maybe more than ever, struggling to find solutions to global change. And one reason for that are trade-offs that exist between certain ecosystem services. And trade-offs are simply said if one thing has to decrease if the other one increases. So there's a connection between the two that is excluding increase on both sides. And applied to our ecosystem services, where are the biggest trade-offs and how can we manage them? That's the biggest question for probably our generation and the next coming ones. And there's a team of researchers that reviewed 473 articles published in the last 16 years, from 2005 to 2020. And they're based on empirical studies on trade-offs in ecosystem services. They report a total of 198 pairs of services with trade-off relationships. And the most frequently observed trade-off relationships were found between crop production and climate regulation, crop production and water regulation, crop production and soil formation, crop production, recreation and ecotourism, and crop production and biodiversity conservation. And these arrows illustrate that all go back to food production, that agricultural food production is really in the epicenter of this trade-off situation between providing essential products for a growing world population and maintaining the supporting and regulating functions of our ecosystems. Here's an illustration by Rebecca Henriksen from the University of KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa that's based on a publication by Foley et al. In 2005. And it shows a conceptual framework for comparing trade-offs in ecosystem services in different land use scenarios. So on the left here, we have the natural ecosystem. Then we have intensive cropland, and on the right, cropland with restored ecosystem services. And on the black axis, you see the different ecosystem services, and the yellow petals here, or the extent of these petals, indicate the extent to which these services are provided. In natural ecosystems, we have forest production, water flow regulation, carbon sequestration, and so on, but no crop production. In intensive cropland, we have only crop production, and none of the other ecosystem services are provided. And this is just theoretical. In the cropland with restored ecosystem services, which is the idea we are aiming for, we will have crop production at its best and also the regulating and supporting ecosystem services. But as I said, this is a theory, and it's probably the biggest challenge for humankind to get to this stage here. But in saying that, there are already great alternatives to industrial agriculture and intensive cropland that aim to incorporate and foster as many beneficial functions of an ecosystem as possible. Just to name a few, there's organic agriculture, integrative agriculture, permaculture, conservation agriculture. And we've also heard a lot of amazing ideas and strategies from Pablo just before. And luckily, these alternatives have become the focus of many practitioners and researchers and also the public. I decided to mix up theory with some own practical examples from my research. So I would like to take you on a trip or to invite you on a trip to Tanzania with me, where we look at the ecosystem services, pest control and pollination in coffee plantations. And it's the afternoon. Most of us will have had a coffee or two or three, and most of us do that on a daily basis. That's why coffee is an internationally important cash crop. And it's not only economically important, but it also has huge implications for the people, for the land, and the producers. And we are at Mount Kilimanjaro to find out whether natural pest control by birds and bats and pollination by insects changes with land use intensification. And we're going to look at 3 different plantation types, which are more or less intensified. We use these mesh cages that you can see in the photo, and little mesh bags here to exclude the big ones here for birds and bats, and the small bags are to exclude pollinators for 6 months. And we'll collect data from 288 trees that are either open controls, so no animals excluded, or only pollinator exposure, or birds and bats excluded only, or a combination of birds, bats, and pollinators excluded. Okay, welcome to the first and most fascinating plantation type, the chaga home garden. This is a multi-cropping system that has developed over 2,000 years. And it's often been referred to as the original agroforestry system. It's also a best practice example for permacultural design. These chaga home gardens have evolved through a gradual transformation of natural forests, so you still find a lot of the wildlife in these plantations. You can see the different vegetation layers here. It usually consists of trees, shrubs, and food crops, and animals. So the lowest vegetation layer consists of food crops such as vegetables. Then we have coffee bushes, and then banana palms, and then trees for like mango, avocado, or firewood. And using these multiple layers maximizes the use of land and enables food production with a minimum of external inputs because the animals roam around and fertilize wherever they go. These home gardens are not just incredible places for biodiversity conservation, but they also enable the people that own them a good life, a good income through fair trade relationships. Usually the coffee that is produced here, you can buy as Highland coffee from fair trade organizations. And the next plantation we're visiting is a bit less complex. There are 2 layers, coffee bushes and leftover shading trees. So it's more intensified. But the vegetation structures and wildlife are not comparable to home gardens. And these shaded plantations are usually owned not by locals, but by international investors or companies such as, international companies. Then we arrive at the most intensified coffee agroecosystem, where most of our coffee comes from, unfortunately. And here you can see a monoculture of coffee varieties that were bred to tolerate the sun, because coffee is usually grown in half shade. And the owners of these sun plantations are big companies and investors, and local people are dropped off by buses to pick the berries under really bad circumstances. And I've often observed that there were pesticides sprayed while the people were working. And now we come to the results, and I'd like to guide you through this figure. In the top panel here, we have fruit set, which can be compared to coffee quantity, so how many berries are on the twig. And in the bottom panel, fruit weight or coffee quality. These are both very important parameters for productivity, and we're looking at the effect of our exclosures in the 3 different plantation types: chaga home garden, shaded plantation, and sun plantation. And for fruit sets up here, we can see that where birds and bats had access to the trees, so the dark gray bars here, where they had access to the trees, the quantity of coffee berries was higher than where they were excluded. And in the bottom panel, we can see that fruit weight or coffee quality was higher, again, the dark gray bars, was higher when pollinators had access to the trees than when they were excluded from the trees. And the conclusion of this collaborative study is that complementary ecosystem services provided by pest predators and pollinators together increase the quantity and quality of coffee beans. Surprisingly, there was no significant difference between the plantation types, but we did find a way more diverse pollinator community in the home gardens than in the sun plantations. And in sun plantations, it might be that the reason that we found equally good ecosystem service provisioning because they had a lot of commercial honeybees there that were brought there to pollinate. Yeah, and please bear in mind that we only looked at 2 ecosystem services out of 19. And if we would have looked at water regulation, soil formation, or social dimensions of the growing system, we likely would have seen strong effects of land use intensification. The data from this coffee plantation experiment was used in a meta-analysis on the effect of biodiversity on crop production, where we analyzed data from 89 studies and over 1,400 locations around the world. In this map here, you can see that was Tanzania. And in yellow, you see pollination experiments. In green, you see pest control experiments. And in this meta-analysis, we explored the relative importance of diversity for pollination, natural pest control, and crop yields. And the results across these 89 studies show a clear trend that we can see in these 2 graphs here. The graph on the left is for pollination, the graph on the right for pest control. And on the x-axis, we have the standardized pollinator richness or natural enemy richness. And on the y-axis, we have the ecosystem service provisioning, pollination, and pest control. And we see this clear correlation between richness and ecosystem service provisioning. So if there are a lot of diverse pollinators or the high diversity of pest control or natural enemies, we have a high provisioning of pollination and of pest control. So earlier we've established that there are trade-offs between food production and many regulating services, but now we've also seen that there are synergies that we can use for agricultural production. So the conclusion of this slide is fostering biodiversity improves crop production. And in turn, with this meta-analysis, we found that landscape simplification has negative effects on pollinator and natural enemy richness, which has cascading effects back to their ecosystem service and to crop yields. So simplification reduces richness of pollinators and richness of pest control agents, and thereby reduces pollination, pest control, and crop yields. And the conclusion from this meta study is that maintaining the biodiversity of ecosystem service providers is vital to sustain the flow of key ecosystem services. And now we've heard a lot about what can go wrong, but how can we do it right? And as I said, there are multiple really great initiatives and alternative agriculture that is aiming at exactly this. And there are 3 important agroecological principles that several authors, practitioners, and policymakers have agreed on in the past years. And a way that is based on these principles is, for instance, conservation agriculture. So the first principle is increasing plant diversity and soil cover, for instance, through crop rotation, intercropping, and mixtures. And by doing so, we can decrease nutrient loss, increase biomass, and increase rhizosphere deposition. And this has an effect on soil fertility, a positive effect on soil fertility, and can increase the regulating services such as biodiversity. And the second principle is to minimize the mechanical and chemical disturbances of soil function. And whenever possible, to seed and plant into untilled soil, so the no tillage movement. And the first advantage of this is that we can increase soil organic matter and we can improve soil physical properties and support the development of soil life. And that is true for micro, meso, and macro. And by doing so, we improve soil structure, which you can see in this figure here. There's conventional tillage on the right side, and you can see that it's really compacted soil, and it's not nice and mixed through like in the natural soil structure picture here. And the third principle is to organize the landscape matrix, or in simple words, to create habitats for beneficial organisms. And this we can achieve by adding hedges, like Pablo just presented. You can use alley cropping, where you have the trees between the alley crops. You can add other semi-natural habitats, such as wildflower strips on the field margins to attract birds and other predators or pollinators. And because we know that biodiversity improves ecosystem service provisioning and also crop production, it's really important to diversify the landscape matrix. And this one here is a nice overview by Alison Power that she published in 2010, with which I would like to conclude the first part of my talk. And it shows the farm on the left side here, and the landscape surrounding the farm on the right side. And here we see the products that we can obtain from the farm, provisioning services such as food, fiber, and bioenergy, but also the ecosystem disservices, such as loss of biodiversity and wildlife habitat, nutrient runoff, sedimentation of waterways, pesticide poisoning, and greenhouse gas emissions. In the top, we see the management practices that can be used to increase synergies among ecosystem services. So on the farm side here, farm management, there is the option of no tillage, increasing crop diversity, increasing crop rotation, and cover cropping. And on the landscape side, we can include windbreaks, hedgerows, riparian vegetation, and natural habitat patches. So far, we've looked at agriculture outside of cities, but more than half the world's population lives inside cities, and a number that is forecasted to rise up to 67% by 2050. So there is an enormous pressure on urbanized land and its ecosystem services to provide like recreation, crops, water regulation, and so on, while coping with global climate change and rising world populations. Urban development is also causing the destruction of high biodiversity habitats outside of cities. And this is especially crucial in developing countries where cities are expanding most rapidly. In the next few minutes, we will look at ecosystem services in agriculture, in urban agriculture, because urban food production is becoming more and more important. Yeah, within the city, green spaces can be highly productive and biodiverse habitats. So if they are well managed, they often exceed agricultural landscapes outside of cities in terms of biodiversity. And the takeaway message here is that urban expansion on the one hand can decrease biodiversity in the surrounding landscape, but if these green spaces within the city are well managed, they can be hotspots for biodiversity and ecosystem service provisioning. And there are various forms of urban green spaces that provide ecosystem services. And this year, Evans and I published a very nice review on the ecosystem services of different urban agriculture and green infrastructure. And the figure here shows the number of studies from different study systems within the city. Red stands for edible vegetation, blue for non-edible vegetation, yellow for edible and non-edible vegetation. And I wanted to share this with you because on the one hand, you can see where we have a lot of data and where we're still lacking data, for instance, greenhouses, indoor spaces, natural spaces, religious spaces, riparian spaces, and vacant spaces in cities. But I also just wanted to use it to show you the diverse types of green spaces that provide ecosystem services. And this team of researchers analyzed which of the green spaces provided most ecosystem services. So on the left side here, there's the list of services and the 4 categories that we know already. And on the top, we'll find the different urban green spaces. So farms, allotments, community gardens, green spaces, greenhouses, indoor spaces, natural spaces, parks, religious spaces, residential gardens, riparian spaces, roadsides and pathways, roofs, schools, vacant spaces, and woodlands. So as I said, a huge variety of different green spaces that we might not always think of, spaces that provide ecosystem functioning. So this heat map here shows the number of studied instances where ecosystem services were provided. And the scientists found that parks, green spaces, community gardens, and allotments were the most multifunctional spaces, and each of them delivered over 16 different ecosystem services from across all 4 categories. Parks actually provided most of the ecosystem services in this study. And the most frequently provided services across these different types of landscape were local climate and air quality regulation, recreation, mental and physical health, and maintenance of genetic diversity. So it looks like there's also a lot more work to do, especially in the face of global change. Very little has been done on these 3: moderation of extreme events, disease regulation, and biological control. And this becomes important when we think of flooding events in cities or strong thunderstorms that are happening more frequently. With disease regulation, it's important to know that we have more and more invasive species like fungi and more pathogens coming. Okay, and then let's get back to some practical examples. At our chair, we mainly work in community gardens. And here we investigate the effects of urbanization on pollination by wild bees. You can see in the first photo, and other pollinating insects like ants as well, and hoverflies, and natural pest control, especially by predatory wasps. Attention, this is an advertisement for my talk on Thursday. Yeah, we will hear all about the potential of social wasps as natural pest control agents in urban agriculture. In these gardens, we also look at soil formation through decomposition. We started a tea bag experiment where you bury tea bags for 90 days and then look at the decomposition rates and if it is affected by different bed management types. Our network consists of over 30 really diverse gardens in Berlin and Munich. Some are on rooftops next to a club, and some are somewhere in a park or between 2 huge roads. And what we found last year is that the diversity of pollinators was not so much determined by the level of urbanization or the impervious surface around the garden, but that it was more important whether the garden had diverse floral resources. So if a garden was surrounded by concrete and Berlin traffic, but it had a lot of different flowering plant species, then the diversity of pollinating insects was still higher than in gardens without floral resources. So this is in line with many other studies on the effect of urbanization on pollinators. And I personally think that it's very hopeful, because even if you just have small spaces in a city that you can use, you can still make a difference in plant or you can add resources you can add resources and provide flowering plants to attract pollinating insects, for instance. And urban gardens are not only spaces for local food production, but they provide multiple ecosystem services to the city, because they're usually well-managed spots that are unsealed surfaces, and because there's so many different people with different backgrounds, they also bring different plants, and it's usually very diverse and a very structured or diversely structured ecosystem in a very small space. Numerous studies show their multifunctionality in terms of ecosystem services. These urban agroecosystems provide cooling, for instance, through evapotranspiration of vegetation of large trees or small trees. They provide water retention and flood control by leaves and unpaved surfaces, which is really important for the cities. They provide erosion control and soil formation and the conservation of biodiversity next to producing food. Urban agriculture has also been reported to strengthen social interactions and inclusion. They support community ownership and empowerment in studies around the world. I think the next step is to acknowledge the role of urban agriculture and its multifunctionality in terms of ecosystem services, and to incorporate them into urban planning. With this last slide, I'd like to thank you all for listening, and I want to thank my team here at the Chair for Urban Productive Ecosystems for being a wonderful team. And of course, none of this research that I presented to you today would have been possible without the help of many amazing colleagues and supervisors and funding organizations that believe in our research. Okay, feel free to ask questions.
Thank you very much, Julia, for the talk. And apparently we have a first question in our Q&A sheet. So please, everyone, earlier in the chat, Pavel had shared the link to the spreadsheet where everyone can put down their questions. And I would just navigate to the sheet now to see. But Marjorie, in case you like, you could also just pose your question directly.
Yes, then I would just, my question is about wasp infestation in our region. Apparently there's a lot of wasp for whatever reason in our area, and they have begun to attack people at the door of our house. And the more obvious things like putting up a fake wasp nest doesn't seem to be enough. So I'm wondering what suggestions you might have, and also how do we think about the impact on the ecosystem of, let's say, insecticide or some other methods of trying to rid of wasps. And lastly, some people have been saying, oh, it doesn't really matter because the wasps are the enemies of the honeybees, and we need a lot more honeybees than we need wasps. I don't know if that's true, but anyway, I just wanted to get your opinion on this.
Thank you for this wonderful question. Yeah, it's actually a really good question. And there are multiple points that I would like to answer to, but because it emotionally does something to me, I'm going to reply to the one with the honeybees. Okay, so wasps are not bred, they're wild animals, whereas honeybees, for instance, are bred, so they're kind of like pets. It's a bit like comparing a wolf with a pug. And the sentence that honeybees are more important than wasps is not true. So wasps are really important for the ecosystem. They are predators, important predators, but there are studies that show that certain ecosystem services are more sexy, more of a sexy topic for the public than others. So pollination, which is a sexy topic because it's sex between the flower and the insect, basically, is a nice topic. People like it. It's kind of honeybees are hairy and cute, whereas wasps they prey on other insects. It's not a nice topic. It's not beautiful and cute, but they are nevertheless really important for the ecosystem, and they also provide pollination. But the main service they are known for is pest control, and especially in agroecosystems. And some of the systems that are very intensified, they're even used as backup pollinators when other animals can't cope with pesticides or intensification. Wasps still fly around and pollinate. That was the first one. And there's a nice paper on this by Sari and Sumner. It's called Why We Love Bees and Hate Wasps. And the second question was, Marjorie, are these wasp nests in their native range, or are they invasive wasps? Because that makes a big difference.
I don't know. Unfortunately, I don't know.
Where are you based, or where are the nests?
This is in Canada.
Oh, yeah, it depends a bit on the species. So there are invasive wasps. Some of the wasps that are native to Germany, for instance, or Europe, they have expanded throughout the world. For instance, to North America, to Oceania, to Australia, and they cause harm to the native ecosystems because they're also very successful there. They can overwinter, for instance, and then in this case, it's not pest control, but they're actually doing harm to the native ecosystems. But it depends on the species that you have. And in general, if it's a native species, even though they sting and even though people might not like them, they're really important. And I would not get rid of them.
Well, what would you do though if you have someone in my house has anaphylaxis to this kind of? So it's not a trivial question for us.
I guess then removing it from the entrance of the house makes sense.
Yeah. Okay.
If it's, thank you.
There's another question in the chat. Sebastian translated it to us for us to English. I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding about the tea bag project. The question is, tell us something about the biodiversity of insects on tea bags. And they're wondering if they understood the translation correct.
Yeah, thank you for this question. So yeah, I'd like to clarify this. So the tea bag experiment is to test the decomposition rates of the tea bags. And maybe you're interested in joining. It's a really cool project. It's global. It's a global project where people from different countries and different ecosystems bury tea bags, standardized tea bags, and leave them in the soil for 90 days. And we just measure how much of the tea has been decomposed, and whether the bed management, for instance, if there's soil cover or mulch growing or lying on top of the tea bags, or it's plain soil, whether that has an impact on the decomposition rate. But there's also a new paper, and I think it's super interesting, that looks at eDNA metabarcoding of the organisms that are involved in this decomposition. And with this method, you can find out which insects as well in the soil help decompose the tea bags. I hope it's clear.
Yeah, thank you very much, Julia. Maybe it would be nice if you could share this paper and maybe also link to the tea bag project with us, maybe on the chat, so people can also look it up.